My son bought his wife a house and then handed me the mortgage documents. You have saved enough, he said. It is time to help your family. I said no. They sued me for $900,000, and the judge asked me exactly one question. I am Gerald, but everyone calls me Jerry. I am 73 years old, and I spent 40 years as an industrial electrician, crawling through crawl spaces and wiring factories while my son Brandon sat playing video games. I thought I had seen everything until the day I received a subpoena from my own flesh and blood. Before I continue this story, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who thought your retirement fund was their personal piggy bank. It started on a humid Saturday afternoon in late July. I was driving my 2005 Ford F-150 down a street that smelled like money. The kind of money that is usually borrowed, not earned. This was a gated community in the suburbs of Chicago where the lawns were manicured with scissors and the driveways were filled with cars that cost more than my first house. I checked the address again. It seemed impossible. 6 months ago, my son Brandon was asking me for gas money because he had been let go from his sales job for what he called restructuring. But what I knew was chronic lateness. Now he was inviting me to a housewarming party at a 5-bedroomed room mansion. I pulled my truck up to the curb. It is a good truck. It has rust on the wheel wells and a dent in the tailgate from a job site back in '98, but the engine runs like a clock. I parked it right behind a brand new silver Mercedes SUV that still had the temporary dealer plates on it. I had barely turned off the ignition when the front door swung open. It was Vanessa, my daughter-in-law. She did not smile. She did not wave. She marched down the driveway in heels that looked like weapons, clicking sharply against the pavement. "Jerry," she said before I even opened my door, "you cannot park that thing here." I stepped out and adjusted my cap. "Good to see you too, Vanessa," I said. "Happy housewarming." She grimaced, looking at my truck like it was leaking raw sewage onto her pristine driveway. "Seriously, Jerry, the neighbors are going to talk. Can you move it around the corner? Maybe 2 streets over. We have important guests coming." I looked at the Mercedes. "Nice car," I said, ignoring her request. "Is that yours?" Vanessa pined, smoothing her designer dress. "It is. Brandon surprised me with it last week. We needed something reliable for the new chapter of our love songs." I leaned against the door of my truck. Reliable is a 20-year-old Ford that is paid off, Vanessa. Reliable is having money in the bank, not on your driveway. Speaking of which, how did you afford all of this? Vanessa crossed her arms. Her eyes narrowed. "We are investing in our future, Jerry. Brandon has some very exciting ventures taking off. You would understand if you had ever thought big. But you were always satisfied with being just a worker." That stung. Being a worker put food on the table for 30 years. Being a worker paid for Brandon's college degree, which he never uses. "I am not moving the truck," I said, calm but firm. If your neighbors are offended by a vehicle that has done an honest day's work, then they are not the kind of people I care about impressing. I grabbed the bottle of whiskey I had brought as a gift and walked past her. She let out a huff of frustration and pulled out her phone, probably to text Brandon that his embarrassing father had arrived. Walking up that driveway felt like walking into a trap. I just did not know yet how deep the pit was. Inside the house was cool and smelled of expensive candles. The foyer was 2 stories high, with a chandelier that looked like it cost more than my annual pension. People were milling about, holding wine glasses and laughing that hollow laugh you hear at corporate mixers. I spotted Brandon near the kitchen island, which was covered in charcuterie boards. He was wearing a blazer over a t-shirt, trying to look like a tech billionaire. He saw me, and his smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he put on his showman face. "Dad," he boomed, coming over to clap me on the shoulder. You made it. He did not hug me. He patted me like I was a client he was trying to close. Quite a place you have here, son, I said, looking around. 5 bedrooms for 3 people. Isn't that a lot of cleaning? Brandon laughed loud enough for his friends to hear. We have a cleaning service, Dad. We are focusing our energy on growth, not scrubbing toilets. Come on, grab a drink. Let me introduce you to some people. He steered me toward a group of men who were discussing cryptocurrency and golf handicaps. This is my father, Brandon announced. He was a master electrician back in the day. Real blue-collar salt of the earth stuff. The way he said it made me sound like a museum exhibit. One of the men, a guy with teeth that were too white, looked me up and down. Cute, the man said. Must be nice to work with your hands. I pay a guy to change my light bulbs. I would not know where to start. They all laughed. Brandon laughed the hardest. I stared at the man. It is not hard, I said. You just have to be willing to get your hands dirty. It is amazing what you can build when you actually work for it. The laughter died down. Brandon cleared his throat. Right. Well, Dad, why don't you go say hi to Jacob? He is in the game room. I found my grandson Jacob in a room that had 3 different gaming consoles and a television the size of a billboard. He is 8 years old and the only reason I tolerate Vanessa. Grandpa, he yelled, dropping his controller and running to hug me. Hey, buddy, I said, squeezing him tight. This is a big house, huh? Yeah, but Mom says I can't touch the walls because they are custom paint, Jacob whispered. And I can't play in the living room. It is kind of boring. My heart broke a little. A $600, $1,000 museum where a kid cannot be a kid. I spent an hour in there with him just listening to him talk about Minecraft because it was the only real conversation in the entire house. Eventually, Vanessa appeared in the doorway. Dinner is served, she said sharply. And Jacob, go wash your hands twice. We do not want grease on the napkins. She looked at me when she said grease. The dinner was a spectacle. Steaks that were too rare served on square plates. Wine that tasted like oak and money. The conversation revolved entirely around material things, who bought what boat, who was vacationing in the Maldives, who had the best private school connections. I sat there eating quietly, observing. I have a habit of watching people's hands. You can tell a lot by hands. Brandon's hands were shaking. Where every time he lifted his glass, there was a tremor. He was sweating despite the air conditioning. He was terrified. I knew the look. It is the look of a man who is juggling chainsaws and knows he is about to drop one. When the coffee was served, Brandon stood up and tapped his glass with a spoon. Everyone, he said, thank you for coming to celebrate our new home. We are so blessed. But I want to have a special moment with my father. Dad, why don't we go into the study for a moment? The guests clapped politely. Vanessa gave me a smile that looked like a shark smelling blood. I followed Brandon into the study. It was lined with empty bookshelves. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk and gestured for me to sit in the leather chair opposite him. Vanessa came in and closed the door, leaning against it like a prison guard. So Dad Brandon started loosening his tie. What do you think it is impressive, Brandon? I said honestly. But I am going to ask you again how you were on unemployment 6 months ago. Brandon waved his hand dismissively. That was a transition period. I told you I have launched a consulting firm. We are projecting massive revenue by Q4. Projecting, I asked, so you do not have the money yet. That is how business works. Jerry? Vanessa interjected, pushing off the door and walking toward us. You leverage debt to build wealth, but you have to have capital to start. She placed a thick blue folder on the desk in front of me. It landed with a heavy thud. What is this? I asked. Open it, Brandon said. I flipped open the cover. It was not a business plan. It was not a photo album. It was a mortgage application. I scanned the pages. The purchase price was $800,000. The loan amount was $600,000. The interest rate was adjustable and terrifyingly high. But what caught my eye was the section labeled co-bearer. Typed neatly in that box was my name, Gerald Fitzpatrick. I looked up. Brandon was watching me. His face pale, but his jaw set in stubborn defiance. I did not agree to this, I said, my voice low. We know, Dad, Brandon said quickly. That is why we are having this talk now. The bank needs a cosigner. My credit score is recovering from the unemployment stint, and Vanessa's student loans are still on the books. We just need your signature to finalize the deal. I looked back at the document. It wasn't just a signature. They wanted a down payment 20%. $120,000 also listed under source of funds, gift from father. I closed the folder. No, I said. Vanessa stepped forward. Excuse me? I said no. I am not co-signing a $600,000 loan for a house you cannot afford, Brandon. And I am certainly not giving you $120,000 as a gift. Brandon stood up, slamming his hands on the desk. Dad, you have the money. I know you do. You sold the rental property in Ohio last year. You have your pension. You have Mom's life insurance money still sitting in bonds. You're sitting on a pile of cash and living like a pauper. That is my retirement, Brandon, I said, standing up to meet his eyes. I worked 40 years for that. That money is for my health care when I get too old to drive. It is for emergencies. It is not for buying a mansion to impress friends who do not care about you. It is for family, Vanessa hissed. She was standing right next to me now, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume. You are selfish, Jerry. You are an old man living alone in a paid-off house. What are you going to do with that money? Take it to the grave. You have a duty to help your son. He is trying to build a legacy for your grandson. Do not bring Jacob into this, I warned, to this. If you cared about Jacob, you would want him to grow up in a safe neighborhood, Brandon argued. You would want him to have the best. But no, you would rather hoard your pennies. I looked at my son. I saw the sweat on his forehead. I saw the desperation. Brandon, tell me the truth. I said, you already signed the purchase agreement, didn't you? You put down earnest money you did not have. He looked away. We closed on the house 10 days ago. Dad, we have a bridge loan that expires in 48 hours. If we do not get the mortgage finalized with your down payment, we lose the house. We lose the deposit. We lose everything. So you bought a house you could not pay for assuming I would bail you out, I said. We assumed you would want to be a father, Brandon shouted. I reached for the glass of red wine Brandon had poured for me. It was a 2015 Cabernet, expensive and deep red. I looked at the white carpet beneath my boots. I looked at the folder on the desk. I looked at my son and his wife, who looked at me with such entitlement, such arrogance, that it made my stomach turn. I am a father, I said quietly. Being a father means teaching your children not to touch a hot stove. If I pay this for you, I am just letting you burn down the whole kitchen. I tipped the glass. The dark red wine poured out in a steady stream, splashing onto the pristine white rug. It soaked in, spreading like a bloodstain. Vanessa shrieked, "Are you insane?" That is a Persian rug. I placed the empty glass on the mahogany desk. I would rather burn my money in a barrel than give it to a pair of vultures like you. I turned and walked toward the door. Brandon scrambled around the desk. Dad, wait. You can't leave. We will be ruined. That sounds like a personal problem, I said without stopping. Vanessa's voice rang out shrill and vicious, stopping me with my hand on the doorknob. If you walk out that door, Jerry, you will never see Jacob again. The room went silent. I could hear the party chatter outside, but in the study, the air was sucked out of the room. I turned around slowly. Vanessa was smiling. It was a triumphant, ugly smile. You heard me, she said. We are the parents. We decide who sees him all. If you are not part of this family's financial future, then you are not part of this family at all. No more visits, no more birthdays. You will die alone, Jerry. I looked at Brandon. He was looking at the floor, unable to meet my gaze, but he did not speak. He did not defend me. He let her use his son as a bargaining chip. That was the moment the last thread of sympathy snapped. I looked at Vanessa, and I spoke with the calm of a man who has wired high-voltage circuits and knows exactly which wire cuts the power. You think you are holding the ace card, I said, but you have no idea who you are playing against. I opened the door. Do not expect me at Thanksgiving. I walked out through the party, past the shocked faces of the guests who had heard the shouting, past the charcuterie boards, and out the front door. I got into my rusted Ford F-150 and started the engine. As I drove away, I saw Brandon watching from the window. He looked terrified. He should be, because he thought the conversation was over. But I knew the war had just begun. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel, until my knuckles turned white. The threat about Jacob echoed in my head. They thought they could break me with that. They thought I would come crawling back, checkbook in hand, begging to be on my way back into my grandson's life. They underestimated me. I did not go home to sleep. I went home to prepare. I went straight to my home office, a small room off the kitchen that was piled high with manuals and schematics. I unlocked the filing cabinet in the corner. I pulled out my own financial records. Brandon was right about one thing. I had money. I'd been investing in land since the 80s, buying up cheap lots outside the city, when everyone else was buying fancy cars. I sold them to developers 10 years ago for a profit that would make Vanessa's head spin. But I also pulled out something else, a credit monitoring report I had received 3 days ago. I had ignored it thinking it was a glitch. It showed a drop in my credit score, a steep drop. I sat down at my computer and logged into the monitoring service. There were 3 new credit cards opened in my name in the last month. One from MX, one from Chase, one from Citibank. The total balance on them was already $50,000. The billing address for the cards, the mansion I had just left. My hands stopped shaking. A cold clarity washed over me. They hadn't just asked for the mortgage, they had already started stealing. Brandon had used my social security number. He knew it because he helped me set up my Medicare last year. They were furnishing their new house with my identity. I picked up the phone. I did not call Brandon. I did not call Vanessa. I called the Fraud Department of American Express. I am Jerry Fitzpatrick. I told the operator, I want to report a case of identity theft. Who is the suspect? The operator asked. I looked at the photo on my desk. It was a picture of me and Brandon fishing when he was 10 years old. He looked so happy holding a small bass. I turned the photo face down. The suspect is my son, I said. I spent the next 3 hours freezing every account, reporting every card, and locking down my credit. By the time I was done, it was 2:00 a.m. I poured myself a glass of cheap whiskey, the kind I actually like. I sat in my armchair in the dark. I knew what was coming. When those cards got declined, when the bridge loan expired, when the reality hit them, they would come for me. They would come with anger, and they would come with lawyers. And I would be ready. The next morning, Sunday, broke gray and rainy. My phone started ringing at 7:00 a.m. It was Brandon. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately and again. Then a text message popped up. Dad, what did you do? The card was declined at the movers. Call me now. I took a sip of coffee and deleted the message. I got dressed in my Sunday best. Not a suit, but a clean button-down and my good slacks. I drove to the police station. The officer at the desk was a guy I knew, Mike. I had wired his garage a few years back. Jerry, what brings you in on a Sunday? Mike asked. I need to file a report, Mike, I said. Harassment, and I need to put a statement on record regarding financial fraud. Mike's face went serious. Who is the problem? Jerry? I took a deep breath. My son and his wife. Leaving the station with a copy of the police report in my hand, I felt a strange mixture of grief and resolve. I had just criminalized my own family, but they had fired the first shot. I drove to the hardware store not to buy anything, just to walk the aisles. It calms me, the smell of sawdust and oil. My phone buzzed again. It was a voicemail. I held it up to my ear. It was Vanessa. She was screaming. "You senile old bastard," she yelled. "You froze the accounts." "Do you know what you have done? We have contractors here demanding payment. You are going to fix this, Jerry. You are going to unfreeze those cards, and you are going to sign that mortgage or so. Help me, God. I will make sure you end up in a state-run nursing home, rotting in your own filth. We're going to sue you for everything you have. You think you can cut us off, achieve us." I saved the voicemail evidence. I went home and waited. I did not have to wait long. 2 days later, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. He looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Fitzpatrick?" he asked. "Yes, son." He handed me a thick envelope. "You have been served, sir." I opened the envelope right there on the porch. It was a lawsuit. Plaintiffs Brandon and Vanessa Fitzpatrick, defendant Gerald Fitzpatrick. They were suing me for $900,000. The charges listed were insane. Breach of oral contract, intentional infliction of emotional distress, promissory estoppel. They were claiming I had promised to buy them the house, that they had relied on my promise to their detriment, that my sudden refusal had caused Vanessa severe psychological trauma. I looked up at the deputy. "Rough day?" he asked. I looked at the lawsuit. I looked at the trees in my front yard. The trees I had planted with my late wife 30 years ago. I smiled. "Not yet, deputy," I said. "But it is about to get a whole lot rougher for someone else." I took the papers inside and called the one person I knew Brandon was terrified of. Miss Conincade. She was the lawyer who handled my estate planning. She was 60 years old, wore sharp suits, and had a reputation for eating con artists for breakfast. "I need an appointment," I told her receptionist. "What is the nature of the inquiry war?" I said. "Civil war." I hung up the phone and sat at my kitchen table. I looked at the empty chair where my wife used to sit. "I am sorry, honey," I whispered. "I tried to raise him right, but sometimes you have to prune the tree to save the roots." And I was about to cut off a very large branch. The next few months were going to be ugly, but I had a secret weapon. Brandon and Vanessa thought they were suing a helpless old man. They didn't know about the one piece of paper I had found in my files from 10 years ago. A piece of paper that proved everything they were claiming in that lawsuit was not just a lie, but a felony. I poured another coffee. Let them come. I was ready to burn it all down. The silence in my house was absolute. It was not the peaceful silence of a Sunday morning, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. For 3 days I called Brandon. The call went straight to voicemail. I called Vanessa. It did not even ring. It just disconnected. I was blocked, erased. It was as if I had never existed in their digital world. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the small box in my hands. It was wrapped in simple brown paper and tied with a piece of twine. Inside was a compass, not a plastic toy from a cereal box, but a genuine brass compass from World War II. My father had given it to me when I turned 8, and I had polished it until it shone like gold. I had been saving it for Jacob's 8th birthday, which was today. I knew I was not welcome at the mansion. I knew I was not going to be invited to the party with the clowns and the catered food. But I thought, surely I could drop off a gift. Surely a father has the right to give his grandson a piece of family history. I was wrong. I got into my truck and drove to Jacob's private school. It was a sprawling brick complex with iron gates and security cameras that swiveled to follow you as you approached. I had wired the gymnasium there 15 years ago. I knew every conduit in the building. I parked in the visitor lot and walked toward the main office. The air was crisp and I adjusted my collar, trying to look presentable, trying to look like a grandfather and not the pariah my family had made me. I reached for the door handle, but it did not open. A buzzer sounded and a voice crackled over the intercom. "State your business." "I am Gerald Fitzpatrick," I said, leaning toward the speaker. "I am here to drop off a package for my grandson, Jacob Fitzpatrick. It is his birthday." There was a long pause, the kind of pause that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. "Wait there," the voice said. I waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Parents walked past me, eyeing the old man standing alone by the door, clutching a small brown box. I felt their judgment like a physical weight. Finally, the heavy metal door clicked open. A man stepped out. He was not the receptionist. He was built like a linebacker, wearing a security uniform that was too tight across the chest. His name tag read, Miller. "Mr. Fitzpatrick," he said. His voice was flat professional and completely devoid of warmth. "Yes," I said, stepping forward. "I just need to leave this for Jacob." He held up a hand, stopping me in my tracks. "You need to leave the property, sir." I blinked, confused. "I beg your pardon. I am not trying to see him. I know the rules. I just want to leave the gift at the front desk." Miller took a step closer, invading my personal space. He looked down at me, and I saw the glint of a taser on his belt. "You are not hearing me, sir. You are banned from the premises." "Banned?" I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. On what grounds I have never caused a disturbance here in my life? Miller pulled a clipboard from under his arm. He flipped a page and tapped it with a thick finger. "We received a notification yesterday from the custodial parents Brandon and Vanessa Fitzpatrick. They have flagged you as a security risk. The report states that you have a history of volatile behavior and have made threats against the family. You are listed as an imminent danger to the student." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Volatile threats, imminent danger. They had not just blocked my number. They had assassinated my character. "Son?" I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sorrow. "That is a lie. I am a 73-year-old electrician. I have never hurt a fly." Miller did not blink. "I do not know you, sir. I just know what is on this paper. And this paper says, if you show up here, I am supposed to call the police now. I am giving you a break because you look like you are just confused. But you need to get in your truck and you need to go now." I looked at the box in my hand. The brass compass inside felt heavy, a dead weight. "Can you just give it to him?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Please, it is his great-grandfather's." Miller looked at the box, then back at me. For a second, I saw a flicker of humanity in his eyes, but it was quickly extinguished by the protocol of his job. "We cannot accept packages from individuals on the banned list. Take it with you." He turned his back on me and walked inside, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. The lock engaged with a sound that felt final. I stood there for a long time. I watched the other grandparents arriving, picking up their kids, swinging them around in circles. I watched the joy that I was being denied. I walked back to my truck. My legs felt heavy. My chest felt tight. I tossed the box onto the passenger seat. It landed with a dull thud. I drove home without turning on the radio. The silence in the cab was deafening. I thought the humiliation at the school was the end of it. I thought that was the low point of my day. I was naive. 2 hours later, I was sitting in my living room, staring at the wall, when I saw flashing lights reflect against my window, blue and red. I stood up and went to the door. A police cruiser was parked at the curb. It was not Mike, my friend from the station. It was a patrol car I did not recognize. Two officers were walking up my driveway. They walked with their hands near their holsters, their eyes scanning my property as if expecting an ambush. I opened the door before they could knock. "Can I help you, officers?" I asked. One of them, a young man with a buzz cut and eyes that looked like they had seen too much, stepped forward. "Are you Gerald Fitzpatrick?" "I am Mr. Fitzpatrick. We are responding to a complaint filed by a Ms. Vanessa Fitzpatrick." I laughed. It was a dry, bitter sound. "Let me guess." "She says I am harassing her." The officer did not smile. "She claims you attempted to breach security at her son's school today after being explicitly told to stay away. She also claims you have been driving by their residence." "I have not been near their house," I said firmly, "and I went to the school to drop off a birthday gift. I left when I was told to leave." The officer pulled a notepad from his pocket. "Sir, this is a formal warning. The family is in the process of filing a restraining order. Until that is settled, you are to have no contact with them, no phone calls, no text messages, no visits to the school, no driving past their home. If we have to come back here again, we will not be having a polite conversation on the porch. You will be leaving in the back of that car. Do you understand?" I looked at the young officer. He did not know me. He did not know that I had wired the station he worked out of. He did not know that I had spent 40 years building a reputation as a man of his word. All he knew was the story Vanessa had spun. To him, I was just a crazy old man who wouldn't let go. "I understand," I said, my voice cold. "Good," the officer said. "Stay home, Mr. Fitzpatrick. Watch some TV. Leave them alone." They turned and walked back to their cruiser. I watched them go. I watched them drive away, leaving me alone in my house with the curtains drawn. I sat back down in my armchair. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold clarity. This was not a temper tantrum. This was not a family spat that would blow over by Thanksgiving. This was a siege. Vanessa and Brandon were not just mad, they were methodical. They were building a paper trail: the report at the school, the call to the police, the accusations of violence. They were creating a history, a documented timeline of instability. Why would they do that? Why go to such lengths just to cut me off? And then it hit me. They did not just want me out of their lives. They wanted leverage. If they could prove I was unstable, if they could come as a danger to myself or others, they could do more than just get a restraining order. They could make a play for guardianship. They could try to take control of my assets legally by claiming I was unfit. The realization made my blood run cold. They were playing the long game. They were setting the stage to declare me incompetent. I looked at the phone on the table. It was silent. They had blocked me, but they were watching me. They were waiting for me to explode. They were waiting for me to drive over there and scream and pound on the door so they could call the cops and say, "See, we told you he is crazy." I picked up the compass from the table. I ran my thumb over the cool brass. "It points north," I whispered to the empty room. "It always finds the true path." I was not going to give them what they wanted. I was not going to give them anger. I was not going to give them an outburst. I was going to give them nothing. I stood up and walked to my desk. I pulled out a fresh notebook. I wrote down the date. I wrote down the time. I wrote down the name of the security guard, Miller. I wrote down the badge numbers of the police officers. I documented everything. If they wanted a paper trail, I would give them a library. I poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady now. The shock had worn off. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my gut, but it was being pushed down by something stronger. Resolve. They thought they were dealing with a lonely old man who would crumble under the pressure. They thought isolation would break me. But I spent 20 years working in high-voltage cages where one wrong move meant death. I know how to focus when the air is humming with danger. I looked out the window at the darkening street. You want to play games, Brandon, I said softly. You want to use the law against your own father. Fine. But you forgot one thing, son. I taught you how to fish. I taught you how to throw a ball. But I never taught you how to fight a war. And you are about to learn that lesson the hard way. I closed the notebook. Tomorrow I would not go to the school. I would not go to their house. Tomorrow I would go to the bank, and then I would go to a lawyer because if they wanted to paint me as a villain, I might as well start acting like a formidable one. The phone rang suddenly, breaking the silence. I looked at the caller ID. It was Brandon. I stared at the screen. Why was he calling now? After sending the police to my door, I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I picked it up, but I did not say a word. I just listened. Dad Brandon's voice was slurred. He sounded drunk. Dad, are you there? Look, you pushed us to this. You made us do this. The cops said they warned you. Just unfreeze the cards, Dad. Unfreeze them and sign the papers, and this all goes away. We can be a family again. Vanessa is willing to forgive you if you just do the right thing. Don't make us ruin you. I listened to his breathing. I listened to the threat wrapped in a whine. I did not speak. I simply pressed the red button and ended the call. He had just confirmed everything. They were hurting. The frozen cards were biting, and they were desperate. I smiled for the first time in 3 days. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who just realized his opponent has a glass jaw. I turned off the lights and went to bed. I slept like a baby because now I knew exactly what I had to do. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. I was sitting at the kitchen table nursing a cup of black coffee that had gone cold. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that usually precedes a tornado siren. My phone was sitting on the placemat face up. I'd been staring at it, waiting for the fallout from the frozen accounts. But what came through was something entirely different. A notification from my credit monitoring service popped up. I usually ignore these things. They are usually just telling me my score went up a point or that my data was found on the dark web like everyone else's. But this one was red. A red triangle with an exclamation point. Your credit score has changed significantly. It read. I tapped the screen. The app loaded slowly, the little spinning wheel mocking my patience. When the number finally appeared, I thought my glasses were dirty. I took them off, wiped them on my flannel shirt, and put them back on. The number had not changed 5 on 20. I stared at it. For 40 years, I had prided myself on an 800 credit score. It was a badge of honor. It meant I paid my bills. It meant my word was bond. It meant I owed no man anything. Now it said 520. Below the number was a list of alerts. High credit utilization, delinquent payment reported, new account inquiry. My chest tightened. It felt like someone had clamped a vice around my ribs. This was not just a mistake. This was a massacre. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. I did not bother to call the bank. You do not handle a train wreck over the phone. You go to the scene of the crash. The drive to the downtown branch of First National took 20 minutes. I spent every one of them gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands cramped. I knew the branch manager, Mrs. Higgins. She was a good woman who had helped me set up my retirement accounts. She knew I was conservative with money. She knew I still balanced my checkbook with a pen and paper. When I walked into the lobby, Mrs. Higgins was standing by the teller line. She saw me and her face went pale. She knew. She had to know. "Mr. Fitzpatrick," she said, her voice tight. "I was just about to call you. Please come into my office." She did not offer me coffee. She closed the blinds and sat behind her desk, looking like she was about to tell me I had a terminal illness. "Jerry," she said, using my first name, which she only did when things were bad. "We received a flag from the fraud department this morning, but I pulled your file because I did not believe it." "Show me," I said. My voice was a low growl. She turned her monitor so I could see. There they were. 3 credit cards, not the ones I had in my wallet. These were new. A Platinum Amex, a Chase Sapphire Reserve, a luxury retail card for a high-end furniture store. Opened 4 weeks ago. Mrs. Higgins said, pointing to the dates. Right around the time you mentioned your son was moving. The total balance across all 3 cards was $52,000 or $1,000. They were maxed out. Every single penny of credit limit had been used. Print the statements, I said. Mrs. Higgins hit a button, the printer word. It spat out page after page of paper. It took a full minute for it to finish. I took the stack of warm paper and started reading. It was a catalog of greed. $14,000 at a custom furniture store in the city. $7,000 at an electronics warehouse. $3,000 at a designer clothing boutique. $500 for a dinner at a steakhouse. I ran my finger down the list. Italian leather sectional 80 and OLED television crystal chandelier. They had furnished their entire mansion on my back. I felt a wave of nausea. It wasn't the money. The bank would cover fraud. It was the intimacy of the theft. These weren't charges from a stranger in a foreign country hacking my account. These were charges made by a man who had sat at my dinner table, a man I had taught to ride a bike. Look at the applications. Mrs. Higgins said softly, sliding another piece of paper across the desk. I looked. The applications were digital, but the information was precise. My full name, my current address, my annual income calculated to the penny based on my pension and investment returns. And there it was, the key to the vault, my Social Security number. I stared at the 9 digits. I knew exactly when he got it. 6 months ago, when I was switching my supplemental health insurance, Brandon had offered to help me navigate the website. He said the forms were confusing. He said, "Let me handle the data entry." Dad, you just relax. I had thanked him. I had told him he was a good son for helping his old man. He had typed those numbers into his phone, not the computer. I remembered it now. He had saved it. He had kept it like a spare key, waiting for the right moment to unlock the door and rob me blind. He stole my identity, I whispered. The words tasted like bile. Mrs. Higgins nodded slowly. It appears so, Jerry. The IP address used to open these accounts traces back to a residential address in the new development. Your son's address. I leaned back in the chair. The room was spinning slightly. This is a federal crime, she said gently. Identity theft, wire fraud. If we file these affidavit, Jerry, the bank is required by law to refer this to the authorities. There will be an investigation. She was giving me an out. She was asking without asking if I wanted to protect him, if I wanted to eat the $50,000 and save my son from prison. I looked at the statements again. I looked at the date of the steakhouse dinner. It was 2 nights ago, the same night I had walked out of his house. After I left, after I told him no, he went out and spent $500 of my money on a steak. He was not sorry. He was not desperate. He was entitled. He thought I was a resource, a mine to be stripped until it was empty. I looked at Mrs. Higgins. Where do I sign? She pulled out a stack of forms, affidavit of fraud dispute resolutions. I signed my name over and over again. Gerald Fitzpatrick. Gerald Fitzpatrick. With every signature, I was tightening a noose around my son's neck, but he was the one who had kicked the chair out from under himself. When I finished, Mrs. Higgins gathered the papers. We will scrub these from your credit report, Jerry, she said. It will take about 30 days for your score to bounce back. The investigation will start immediately. Thank you, I said, standing up. Jerry, she hesitated. Once this starts, it is like a train. You cannot stop it. The police will be involved. The credit bureaus credit among Chihu. The Secret Service sometimes gets involved with wire fraud this size. Are you sure you are ready for this? I put my hat back on. He stole my name, Mrs. Higgins. He stole 50 years of my good name to buy a leather sofa. I am not the one who needs to be ready. I walked out of the bank into the bright morning sun. The world looked different than it had an hour ago. The colors were sharper. The noise of the traffic was louder. I got into my truck and sat there for a moment. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my email. Credit alert. New inquiry blocked. They were trying again. Even now at 10:00 in the morning on a Monday, they were trying to open another card, probably to pay the movers or the caterers, but I had locked the gate. I started the engine. I did not go home. I had one more stop to make. If I was going to war, I needed a general. I drove to the law offices of Concade and Associates. It was a brick building near the courthouse. Ms. Concade had handled my will 10 years ago when my wife passed. She was a woman who did not believe in small talk. I did not have an appointment, but the receptionist saw the look on my face and buzzed me straight back. Ms. Concade was sitting behind a glass desk that looked like a sheet of ice. She was wearing a gray suit and her reading glasses were perched on the end of her nose. "Jerry," she said, "you look like you just found a body." I sat down and tossed the folder Mrs. Higgins had given me onto her desk. The credit statements slid out fanning across the glass. "I did not find a body," I said. "I found a rat." She picked up the papers, scanning them with eyes that missed nothing. She saw the amounts. She saw the dates. She saw the fraudulent applications. "Your son," she stated, "it was not a question." "My son and his wife," I corrected. She took off her glasses. "They sued you yet, not yet," I said. "But they threatened to. And the police served me with a harassment warning yesterday because I tried to give my grandson a birthday present." Miss Concade let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a terrifying sound. "They are aggressive," she said. "Stupid, but aggressive. They're trying to shock and awe you into compliance. They think you are a soft target." She opened a drawer and pulled out a fresh legal pad. "So what is the objective? Jerry, do you want a settlement? Do you want them to just go away? Or do you want to teach them a lesson?" I looked at the framed degrees on her wall. I looked at the city skyline out her window. I thought about Jacob trapped in that house with parents who saw people as ATMs. "I don't want a settlement," I said. "I want them to understand that they picked the wrong old man to push around." Ms. Concade smiled. It was the smile of a shark that just saw a swimmer fall off a boat. "Good," she said. "Because if they filed a harassment claim against you, they opened the door. We are going to countersue, but we are going to wait. Wait for what I asked. We wait for them to make the first move in civil court," she said. "Let them sue you for the house money. Let them put it on public record. Let them swear under oath that you promised them this money. Because once they do that, combined with this identity theft, we have them on perjury and fraud and elder abuse." She tapped her pen on the desk. "We are going to let them build their own trap, Jerry, and then we are going to let them walk right into it." I left her office feeling lighter. The anger was still there, burning in my gut like a coal fire, but the fear was gone. They had numbers. They had threats. But I had the truth. And I had the receipts. I drove home and parked my truck in the driveway. I walked into my house, which was paid for. I sat on my sofa, which was paid for. I watched my TV, which was 10 years old and paid for. I was not rich in the way they wanted to be. I did not have gold leaf on my walls, but I was free. And soon, they were going to learn exactly how expensive their lifestyle really was. My phone rang again. It was Brandon. I looked at the screen. I could picture him panic in his eyes, trying to figure out why the credit card application had been denied, why the wells were running dry. I answered it. "Dad," he shouted. His voice was cracking. "Dad, what is going on?" We are at the furniture store picking up the rest of the order, and the card was declined. They said the account is closed for fraud. Did you do this? Hello, Brandon? I said, my voice steady. Fix this, Dad. Fix this right now. Vanessa is freaking out. We have people coming over tonight. We need that furniture. You have furniture, son. I said, you bought $14,000 worth of it last week. I saw the statement. There was a pause, a heavy, guilty silence. You saw it? I saw it all, Brandon. The sofa, the TV, the clothes. I saw every cent you stole. Stole, he sputtered. We didn't steal it. We borrowed it. We were going to pay it back once the business took off. We just needed a bridge. We are family. Dad, you would have given it to us anyway. No, I said I wouldn't have. And that is the point, isn't it? You knew I would say no, so you took it. It is just a credit card, Dad. Do not be dramatic. We will pay the minimums. Just call the bank and tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you authorized it. If you don't, we are going to have legal problems. You already have legal problems, Brandon, I said. What does that mean? It means I just left the bank and I signed the affidavit. The line went dead silent. I could hear him breathing. I could hear the background noise of a store, the beeping of a register. You signed them, he whispered. I signed them. You sent your own son to jail. I did not send you anywhere, Brandon. You bought the ticket when you typed my social security number into that application. You are a monster, he screamed. You are a bitter, lonely old monster? You want to play hardball? Fine. You want war? You got it. You will never see Jacob again. And we are going to sue you until you are living in a cardboard box. He hung up. I put the phone down on the table. The house was quiet again, but this time it wasn't the silence of a victim. It was the silence of a man who had just locked the ammunition locker and was waiting for the enemy to charge. They were coming and I was ready. I did not go straight home after leaving the law office. I had one more call to make. Miss Conson-Kate had advised me to keep my head down, but my gut told me I needed more than just a shield. I needed ammunition. If they were going to paint me as a villain, I needed to know exactly who the heroes of their story really were. I called a man named Kowalski. He was a retired detective who now ran a private investigation firm out of a strip mall on the South Side. I had done some wiring for his office years ago, and he owed me a favor. I need a background check, I told him. And I need surveillance 2 subjects. Kowalski did not ask questions. He just asked for names and addresses. I gave him Brandon and Vanessa. It felt unnatural, like a violation of the natural order to stick a private eye on your own son. But the son I raised disappeared the moment he stole my identity. 24 hours later, I was sitting in a booth at a 24-hour diner meeting Kowalski. He slid a manila envelope across the Formica table. He looked tired. You're not going to like this, Jerry. He said, I opened the folder. The first thing I saw were photos of Brandon. I asked you to check on his business. I said, the consulting firm. Kowalski took a sip of his coffee. There is no firm, Jerry. The LLC was dissolved 6 months ago for failure to pay state franchise taxes. He has no clients. He has no office. I looked at the photos. They showed Brandon sitting in his car in a Starbucks parking lot. Then, they showed him driving back to the mansion, entering through the side door, and sitting in that game room I had seen. He leaves the house for an hour every morning to keep up appearances, Kowalski explained. Then he goes back home, closes the blinds, and plays video games online until Vanessa gets home. He is not an entrepreneur. He is level 60 in a fantasy world. I felt a heavy stone settle in my stomach. The big ventures, the projecting revenue. It was all a lie. My son was not just unemployed. He was delusional. He was playing house in a mansion he couldn't afford, pretending to be a titan of industry, while his father's credit score burned to keep the lights on, and the wife I asked turning the page. Kowalski shook his head. That is the dangerous one. Vanessa has 6 judgments against her from creditors in 3 different states. She changes her last name every few years, not legally, just socially. She owes $40,000 in student loans she has defaulted on, and she has a shopping addiction that would bankrupt a small country. He pointed to a spreadsheet. She has been rotating credit cards, paying one off with a cash advance from another. It is a Ponzi scheme. Jerry and you were the new investors she brought in to keep it from collapsing. I closed the folder. It was worse than I thought. They weren't just greedy. They were drowning. They were standing on a trap door with a noose around their necks. And instead of asking for a ladder, they tried to steal the floorboards from under me. "Thank you, Kowalski," I said. I paid him in cash and walked out to my truck. I sat there for a long time watching the traffic pass. I realized then that there was no reasoning with them. You cannot reason with people who are living in a hallucination. Brandon believed his own lies. Vanessa believed she was owed a lifestyle she hadn't earned, and I was the only thing standing between them and the reality that was coming to crush them. I took my phone out of my pocket. I had kept Brandon blocked for 3 days. It was time to open the line, not to negotiate, but to hear the panic. I needed to know how close to the edge they were. I unblocked his number. It took less than 10 minutes. The phone rang. It was Brandon. I answered it on the second ring. "Hello, son," I said. "Dad," he screamed. The sound was distorted by the sheer volume of his rage. "You froze the accounts. You actually froze them. Do you have any idea what you have done? I assume I stopped you from buying more things you cannot afford," I said calmly. "We are at the dealership," Brandon shouted. "We were picking up the lease on the second car. They cut up the car, Dad. They cut it up in front of the salesman. It was humiliating. Vanessa's in the bathroom crying." "Good," I said. "Maybe she will learn that tears do not pay the bills." "You are a sad, bitter old man," Brandon spat. "You are sitting on a pile of money and you are enjoying watching us struggle. I tried to do this the nice way. I tried to honor you. I tried to let you be part of our success." "Success?" I interrupted. "You mean the consulting firm that does not exist, or do you mean the video games you play while your wife spends money she does not have?" The line went silent. A dead, terrified silence. "You know," he whispered, "I hired a private investigator, Brandon. I know about the dissolved LLC. I know about the judgments against Vanessa. I know you are unemployed. I know everything." There was a sound on the other end like a wounded animal. Then the anger returned, but it was different now. It was sharp and cornered. "You spied on us. I protected myself. I corrected. There is a difference. You forced me to do this." Brandon hissed. His voice dropped low, venomous. "I did not want to hurt you, Dad. I really didn't. But you backed me into a corner. You humiliated my wife. You stalked us. And now you have cut off our lifeline. I did not force you to steal my identity. Brandon, we are done talking." He said, "You think you are smart because you have a few dollars in the bank, but you do not know how the world works anymore. You are obsolete." I waited. I let him vent. I let him dig the hole deeper. "We spoke to a lawyer this morning, Dad. A real shark. We are not just going to sue you for the house. We are going to sue you for emotional distress. We are going to sue you for harassment for hiring that PI. We are going to take everything, the house, the pension, the truck. You are going to die with nothing." "Is that a threat, son?" I asked. "It is a promise," he said. "You wanted a war. You got one. See you in court, old man." The line clicked dead. I lowered the phone. My hand was shaking slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. He had said it. He had said the magic words. "See you in court." He thought he was threatening me. He thought he was intimidating me. But he had just walked right into the trap Miss Consincate had set. By suing me, he would have to go on record. He would have to swear under oath. He would have to present his finances to a judge. He was going to drag his lies into the light of a courtroom. And he was too arrogant to see that he was bringing the gasoline to his own funeral, EBT. I started the truck. I had a meeting with Ms. Consincate in the morning. I had to tell her to clear her schedule. The lawsuit was coming, and I was going to be ready to welcome it with open arms. The knock on my door came at 3:00 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. It was not the rhythmic tap of a neighbor looking to borrow a tool. It was the heavy, authoritative thud of law enforcement. I set down my soldering iron and wiped my hands on a rag. I walked to the front door of the house I had paid off 20 years ago and looked through the peephole. A Cook County Sheriff's deputy was standing on my porch. He was adjusting his belt, looking at a clipboard. Behind him, parked at the curb, was a marked cruiser. I opened the door. The heat of the afternoon hit me first, followed by the deputy's unsmiling gaze. He looked to be about my son's age, maybe a few years younger, but he carried himself with the weight of a man who actually worked for a living. "Gerald Fitzpatrick?" he asked. "I am." He extended a hand not to shake mine, but to thrust a thick manila envelope toward my chest. "You have been served, sir," he said. I took the envelope. It was heavier than a wedding invitation, heavier than a tax bill. It felt like a brick. "Have a nice day," the deputy said, turning on his heel and walking back to his car. He did not look back. He knew what was in the envelope. He served papers like this every day to deadbeat dads and bankrupt business owners. He probably thought I was just another old man who had stopped paying his bills. I closed the door and locked it. I carried the envelope to the kitchen table and sat down. I put on my reading glasses. I took a pocket knife and slit the top of the envelope open. I pulled out a stack of papers that was nearly an inch thick. The paper was crisp and white, legally bonded. The first page was a summons. Superior Court of Cook County. Plaintiffs Brandon Fitzpatrick and Vanessa Fitzpatrick. Defendant Gerald Fitzpatrick. I stared at the names. My son, my daughter-in-law suing me. It was one thing to hear the threat over the phone screamed in a drunken rage. It was another thing entirely to see it printed in black ink on court documents. It made it real. It made it cold. I turned the page to the complaint. It was 40 pages long. 40 pages of lies, fabricated realities, and twisted memories designed to strip me of everything I had worked for since I was 18 years old. I began to read. Count 1, breach of oral contract. The lawsuit claimed that 5 years ago, at a 4th of July barbecue, I had verbally promised Brandon that I would purchase a home for him and his future family upon his marriage. It stated that this promise was made in the presence of witnesses, although it did not name them. It claimed that Brandon and Vanessa had relied on this promise to their detriment, making life decisions and career choices based on the expectation of this future asset. I remembered that barbecue. I remembered handing Brandon a beer and telling him that if he worked hard and saved his money, I would help him with the closing costs one day. Closing costs may be $5,000, not a $600,000, $1,000 mansion. But in their version of reality, my encouragement had become a binding legal contract. They were twisting a father's hope into a debtor's obligation. I kept reading. It got worse. Count 2, promissory estoppel. This was a legal term I knew from my days contracting. It meant you could not back out of a promise if the other person had already acted on it. The lawsuit claimed that Brandon had turned down lucrative job offers in other states because I had insisted he stay close to home with the promise of housing security. Lucrative job offers. The boy had been fired from a telemarketing firm and a car dealership. The only thing he had turned down was hard work. But on paper, he sounded like a rising executive who had sacrificed his career for his aging father. Count 3, intentional infliction of emotional distress. This section was clearly written by Vanessa. It was a masterpiece of fiction. It claimed that my sudden and malicious withdrawal of financial support, coupled with my erratic and threatening behavior, had caused her severe psychological trauma. It listed symptoms: insomnia, anxiety, panic attacks, inability to perform marital duties. It claimed that my actions at the housewarming party, pouring the wine on the rug, were a calculated act of intimidation designed to humiliate and terrorize them. I read the paragraph describing the wine incident 3 times. The defendant, with malice aforethought, destroyed personal property and verbally assaulted the plaintiffs in front of their peers, causing irreparable reputational damage and social ostracization. They made me sound like a monster, a violent, unhinged tyrant who got off on destroying his children's happiness. Then I got to the end, the prayer for relief. This is the part where they tell the judge what they want. I looked at the numbers and I actually laughed. It was a short, dry bark of a laugh that echoed in the empty kitchen. They were demanding specific performance, which meant they wanted the court to force me to sign the mortgage and pay the down payment of $120,000. But that was just the start. They wanted $300,000 in compensatory damages for the alleged breach of contract and the financial losses they incurred by entering into a purchase agreement they could not fulfill without my funding. They wanted $150,000 for emotional distress, $75,000 for Vanessa, $75,000 for Brandon. They wanted $100,000 in punitive damages to punish me for my malicious conduct, and they wanted me to pay their legal fees, which they estimated would be another $50,000. I did the math in my head: $900,000. They were suing me for almost $1 million. They were not just trying to get the house, they were trying to wipe me out. They wanted my savings, they wanted my retirement accounts, they wanted the equity in my own home. They wanted to strip me down to the studs and leave me with nothing but the clothes on my back. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the complaint. Attorney at Law, Jonathan Snyder. I knew the name. He was a billboard lawyer, the kind of guy who put his face on the side of buses with slogans like, "We fight for you." He was a shark, but he was a bottom feeder. He made his money by filing frivolous lawsuits and hoping the other side would settle just to make it go away. He was betting that I was a scared old man. He was betting that I would see these numbers, see these accusations, and panic. He thought I would call Brandon crying and begging to settle. He thought I would write a check for the house just to stop the bleeding. I set the papers down on the table. My hand was shaking, but not from fear, from rage. A cold, hard rage that settled in my gut like a stone. This was not a cry for help. This was an assassination attempt. My son was trying to kill my future to pay for his present. I looked around my kitchen. I saw the coffee maker I had fixed 3 times. I saw the linoleum floor I had laid myself. I saw the life I had built with my own 2 hands. And I realized that the son I loved was gone. The boy I had taken fishing, the boy I had taught to drive, was dead. He had been replaced by this stranger, this parasite who would sign his name to a document accusing his father of psychological torture just to get a swimming pool. I picked up the phone. I did not call Brandon. There was nothing left to say to him. You do not negotiate with a terrorist who has a gun to your head. I dialed Miss Consincade's office. It is Jerry, I said when the receptionist answered. Hold, please. A moment later, Miss Consincade was on the line. Did you get it? She asked. I got it, I said. How bad is it? They want $900,000, I said. Breach of contract, emotional distress. They hired Snyder. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end, then a low hum of satisfaction. Snyder, she said. He is sloppy. He likes big numbers because they scare people, but he does not do his homework. What do? I asked. You do nothing, she said. You do not call them. You do not email them. You bring that packet to my office tomorrow morning at 8:00. We are going to draft a response. And Jerry, yes, bring your checkbook. We are going to need to hire a forensic accountant. If they want to claim financial damages, we are going to audit every dime they have ever spent. We're going to turn their financial lives inside out. I understand, I said. And one more thing, she added. Her voice was softer now, less like a lawyer and more like a friend. I am sorry, Jerry. I know this hurts. It does, I admitted. But the part that hurts is dead now. Now it is just business. I hung up the phone. I looked at the 40 pages of lies sitting on my table. They wanted a fight. They wanted to drag me into the mud. They had no idea that I had spent 40 years of souls working in the mud. I knew how to navigate it. I knew how to survive in it. And I knew how to bury things in it. I stood up and went to the refrigerator. I took out a beer. I sat on my back porch and watched the sun go down. Tomorrow I would go to war. But tonight I was going to mourn the loss of my son, because when I walked into that courtroom, I could not see him as my child anymore. I had to see him as the plaintiff, the enemy, and I had to destroy him. The envelope looked innocent enough sitting in my mailbox, sandwiched between a flyer for gutter cleaning and a coupon for pizza. It was smaller than the lawsuit packet, but the return address was the same. The law offices of Jonathan Snyder. It had been 24 hours since I was served with the $900,000 complaint. I had barely slept. I had spent the night pacing my living room, listening to the house settle, listening to the ghosts of 40 years of family life. I took the letter to the back porch. I sat in the rocking chair my wife had bought at a flea market in 1990. The sun was shining, but the air felt cold. I used my thumb to rip open the flap. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream-colored paper. It was not a court document. It was a letter. It was titled Settlement Offer and Mutual Release. I began to read. Snyder's writing style was oily, dripping with fake concern. He wrote that his clients, my son and his wife, were devastated by the breakdown of our relationship. He wrote that they wanted to avoid the pain and public spectacle of a trial. He wrote that they were willing to be generous. Generous. That was the word he used. I skipped to the paragraph labeled Terms of Settlement. In exchange for the immediate dismissal of the lawsuit with prejudice and a full release of all claims against the defendant, the plaintiffs proposed the following. One Gerald Fitzpatrick shall execute a quit-claim deed transferring full ownership of the property located at 14 Oak Street to Brandon Fitzpatrick within 30 days. 2 Gerald Fitzpatrick shall vacate the premises immediately upon transfer, leaving the property in broom-clean condition. 3 Gerald Fitzpatrick shall assume responsibility for the outstanding credit card balances currently under dispute as a gesture of goodwill. I stopped reading. I had to put the paper down on my lap because my hands had started to tremble violently. They wanted my house. They did not just want the down payment for their mansion anymore. They realized that ship had sailed. They knew they could not afford the mortgage on the big house without me. So they had pivoted. They were coming for the safety net. My house is not a mansion. It is a 3-bedroom ranch built in the 70s, but it sits on a double lot. I have maintained it meticulously. New roof, new windows, updated electrical, because I did it myself. It is worth $400,000, $1,000 in today's market. And more importantly, it is paid for. I do not owe a dime to anyone. They wanted me to give it to them. And in exchange, they would graciously stop suing me for money I never promised them. I looked at the next paragraph. We understand this transition may be difficult for Mr. Fitzpatrick. Therefore, Brandon and Vanessa are willing to assist in locating a suitable state-ass assisted living facility for the defendant, ensuring he receives the care he requires. State-ass assisted living facility. The words hung in the air like smoke. They did not just want my assets. They wanted me gone. They wanted to take the home I had built, the home where I raised my son, the home where my wife took her last breath. And they wanted to trade it for a cot in a hallway in some underfunded nursing home. They wanted to warehouse me. They wanted to stick me somewhere out of sight where I could rot quietly while they moved into my house, sold my furniture, and lived off the equity I had spent a lifetime building. This was not a negotiation. This was an eviction notice from my own life. The anger that had been burning in my gut for days suddenly went out. It was extinguished completely. In its place, something else took root. Something cold and hard and very, very quiet. It was the feeling you get when you are working on a live panel and you realize you are one slip away from electrocution. Fear vanishes. Emotion vanishes. All that is left is focus. Survival. I looked at the letter again. I looked at the signature. I looked at the sheer audacity of it. For the last week, I had been grieving. I had been mourning the loss of the relationship with my son. I had been asking myself where I went wrong. I had been wondering if I was too hard on him, if I should have just written the check. But reading that sentence about the state assisted living facility killed the grief. You cannot grieve for someone who is trying to kill you. And make no mistake, this was an attempt on my life. Taking a man's home, taking his independence, taking his dignity, that is a death sentence. They were banking on my fear. They thought I was a scared old man who would see the lawsuit, see the big numbers, and panic. They thought I would sign over the deed just to make the nightmare stop. They thought I would be grateful for their help in finding a nursing home. They had forgotten who I was. I am not just a father, I am a master electrician. I solve problems for a living, and I solved them by finding the fault in the circuit and cutting it out. I folded the letter carefully. I put it back in the envelope. I stood up and walked into the kitchen. I made myself a sandwich. I ate it standing over the sink. I needed fuel. Then I walked into my office. I unlocked the safe. I pulled out the file I had prepared for Miss Consincade, the credit card statements, the affidavit of fraud, the police report. But I added one more thing to the stack. It was a folder I hadn't opened in 10 years. It was dusty. Inside were carbon copies of documents from when Brandon was 28 years old. Back then, he had tried to start a landscaping business. He needed a truck. His credit was bad even then. He asked me to co-sign. I had refused to co-sign, but I had loaned him the money, $20,000. We had signed a contract, a formal promissory note. He was supposed to pay me back in monthly installments. He paid twice. Then he stopped. I never pressed him for it. I let it slide because he was my son, and he was struggling. I wrote it off in my heart as a gift, but I never wrote it off on paper. And right underneath that promissory note was something even more important. It was a sworn statement Brandon had signed for a background check for a job he applied for 5 years ago, a job that required a security clearance. In that statement, he had to list all his debts and assets. He had listed the $20,000 he owed me. He had acknowledged the debt under penalty of perjury. And he had listed something else. He had listed a bank account in the Cayman Islands, an account he claimed held $50,000. I remembered asking him about it. He had laughed and said it was just a place to park some crypto earnings. I looked at the date. If he had $50,000 offshore 5 years ago, and he never paid me back, and he was now claiming poverty while buying a mansion. Miss Consincade was going to have a field day. I put the folder in my bag. I grabbed my keys. I did not call Brandon. I did not call Snyder. I drove straight to Miss Consincade's office. When I walked in, the receptionist looked up. "Mr. Fitzpatrick," she said, "you are early." "Your appointment isn't until tomorrow, I know," I said. My voice was steady calm. "But the situation has changed." "How so?" she asked. "They sent a ransom note," I said, holding up the letter, "and I have decided not to pay the hostage takers." Miss Consincade came out of her office. She saw the look on my face. She saw the letter in my hand. "Come in, Jerry," she said. I walked into her office and sat down. "I am done being sad." "Miss Consincade," I said, "I am done being a father." She nodded slowly. What do you want to do? I slid the settlement offer across the desk. I want a counteroffer, I said. She read the letter. Her eyebrows went up. Then they went down. Her face hardened. They want your house, she said softly. They want me dead, I corrected. They want to bury me so they can spend my money. I reached into my bag and pulled out the old file, the promissory note, the security clearance document. And I want you to use this, I said. She opened the file. She read the promissory note. She read the security clearance form. Her eyes widened. Jerry, do you know what this is? She asked. I do, I said. It is leverage. It is more than that. She said, if he swore to the federal government that he had offshore assets, and he is now swearing to a state court that he is broke because of you, that is perjury, I finished. And tax evasion, she added. She looked at me. If we use this, Jerry, we are not just winning a lawsuit. We are dropping a nuke on his life. If the IRS sees this, if the federal prosecutors see this, he is looking at prison time. Real prison time, not county jail, federal prison. I looked at the woman who was holding my son's fate in her hands. I thought about the nursing home. I thought about the fraud. I thought about Jacob being raised by people who would sell their own father for a swimming pool. Do it, I said. Miss Consincade closed the folder. Okay, Jerry, we are going to draft a response. We are going to decline their generous offer, and we are going to file a counterclaim for the $20,000 plus interest plus damages for the identity theft. And then I said, and then she smiled a cold, shark-like smile. And then we are going to initiate the discovery phase. We are going to demand every bank record, every email, every text message they have sent in the last 5 years. We are going to audit their lives down to the penny. Good, I said. I stood up. Miss Consincade stood up too. You are a strong man, Jerry, she said. Most people would have folded. I adjusted my cap. I am not strong, I said. I am just out of other options. I walked out of the office. The sun was setting. The city looked beautiful in the golden light. I was going home to my house, the house they wanted to take, and I was going to sleep in my own bed. Let them sue me. Let them come. I had the map to the minefield they were walking into, and I was about to watch them step on the first tripwire. 3 weeks later, I walked into what Ms. Consincade called the war room. It was a windowless conference room in the center of her office suite that smelled of stale coffee and printer toner. The long oak table was buried under mountains of paper. Boxes were stacked against the walls, labeled with case numbers and dates. This was the result of discovery. When you sue someone, you open your life to them. You have to provide every document, every email, every bank statement that is relevant to the case. Brandon and his billboard lawyer, Snyder, had demanded my financials, thinking they would find a hoard of cash they could grab. But Ms. Consincade had demanded theirs in return. She had subpoenaed everything. And because Snyder was lazy and Brandon was arrogant, they had sent it all over without filtering a thing. Miss Consincade was sitting at the head of the table in her shirt sleeves, her suit jacket draped over a chair. She looked like a surgeon who had been operating for 12 hours straight. Her eyes were red but focused. Grab a coffee, Jerry, she said without looking up. We have a lot of garbage to sift through. I poured a cup of the black sludge from the pot in the corner and sat down. It is worse than we thought, she said, sliding a stack of papers toward me. I put on my glasses. The top sheet was a bank statement for Brandon's primary checking account. I started reading. It was a diary of self-destruction. I saw withdrawals for online gambling sites, $2,000 here, $5,000 there. I saw payments to a crypto exchange that totaled $40,000 in 3 months. I saw the charges from Vanessa. Sephora Nordstrom a $300 charge for a dog grooming service for a dog they did not own. They were bleeding money. They were hemorrhaging it. Look at the dates, Ms. Consincade said, pointing with a manicured finger. I looked. The gambling losses coincided almost perfectly with the dates he asked me for money. When he told me he needed help with his car payment, because the transmission blew, he had actually lost $3,000 on a football game. When he told me Vanessa needed dental work, he had bought Ethereum at the peak of the market right before it crashed. He has been lying to me for years, I whispered. Not just about the house, about everything. He is an addict, Jerry, she said. He is addicted to the lifestyle. He is addicted to the appearance of wealth, and like any addict, he will burn down everyone around him to get his fix. She pushed another pile toward me. This is Vanessa's credit report. She said it was a sea of red ink. Collections, charge-offs, repossessions. She had a credit score that was lower than my blood pressure. How did they even get pre-approved for a loan, I asked. Who would lend them $600,000 with financials like this? Miss Consincade smiled. It was not a nice smile. That is the million-dollar question, Jerry. Or in this case, the $900,000 question. She stood up and walked to a whiteboard on the wall. She had drawn a timeline. June 1st house offer accepted. June 15th, bridge loan secured. July 4th, the barbecue, where they claimed you promised the money. July 20th, the closing date on the house. She tapped the marker on the date of the bridge loan. A bridge loan is temporary financing, she explained. It is high interest, high risk. You use it to close a deal quickly while you secure a traditional mortgage. To get a bridge loan, you have to prove that you have the permanent financing lined up. You have to show the bank that you are good for it. She turned to look at me. So how did Brandon convince a bank that he was good for it when he has zero income and his wife has a credit score of 400? I looked at the paperwork. I looked at the lies. He used my name, I said. Miss Consincade nodded. We know he used your name, but banks need more than a name Jerry. They need proof. They need signatures. They need documentation. She walked back to the table and picked up a thick folder that was separated from the rest. It was labeled Loan Origination File. We subpoenaed the mortgage lender, she said. We demanded the entire file they used to approve the loan. Snyder tried to block it. He filed a motion to quash, saying it was irrelevant. The judge overruled him yesterday afternoon. We got the file this morning. She placed the folder in front of me. I have gone through it, Jerry. Most of it is standard fake pay-ubs inflated assets. That is standard fraud. People do it all the time, and they usually get away with it until they default. But then she opened the folder to a specific page marked with a yellow sticky note. But then I found this, she said. Her voice dropped an octave. It became very quiet and very deadly. I looked at the document. It was a standard form. The bank logo was at the top. It was filled out in blue ink. I read the title of the document. I read the text, and then my eyes fell to the bottom of the page. There was a signature. It was my signature, or at least it looked like my signature. It had the same loop on the J, the same sharp cross on the T. It was a good forgery, a very good forgery. Brandon had practiced. He had spent hours tracing my signature from old birthday cards and checks I had written him. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I touched the paper. I never signed this. I said, I know. Miss Consincade said, do you know what date that was signed? I looked at the date next to the signature. July 10th. Where were you on July 10th? Jerry, I thought back. July 10th. It was a Tuesday. I was in Florida, I said. I was at the electrical trade show in Orlando. I fly down every year to see the new gear. I have the plane ticket. I have the hotel receipt. Miss Kincaid leaned back in her chair. She clasped her hands behind her head. Exactly. She said, "You were 1,000 miles away. You could not have signed that document." She looked at me with an intensity that made me want to look away. "Jerry, do you know what this document is?" I shook my head. "It looks like a bank form." "It is," she said. "But it is not just a form. It is a federal affidavit. It is a sworn statement submitted to a federally insured financial institution." She leaned forward again, her eyes locking onto mine. "This piece of paper, Jerry, is the smoking gun. This is the nail in the coffin. This is the difference between a family dispute and a federal indictment." "What does it say?" I asked. "It says," she began, pointing to the text, "that you have irrevocably committed to providing funds. But more importantly, it says that the funds are already yours to give." She tapped the paper. "If Brandon claims in court that you promised to give him the money, he is admitting that he did not have the money yet. But this document tells the bank that the money was already verified. It is a trap, Jerry, a trap he built for himself. If he tells the judge the truth that you only promised the money, then this document is a lie he told the bank. That is bank fraud, prison. If he tells the judge this document is true, then he is admitting he already had the money, which means he has no grounds to sue you for it. Case dismissed. He is checkmated, coming and going." She smiled. "But the best part, Jerry, is that he does not know we have this. Snyder does not know we have this. They think this is just buried in the loan file. They think we are looking for emails or text messages about the barbecue promise. They have no idea that we are holding a hand grenade." I looked at the forged signature again. I looked at the betrayal etched in blue ink. My son had not just lied to me. He had impersonated me to a bank. He had committed a felony using my name. "This will send him to prison?" I asked. My voice was so Miss Kincaid did not sugarcoat it. "If we introduce this into evidence, yes, the judge is required to refer it to the district attorney. Mortgage fraud is a serious crime, Jerry. We are talking years, not months." "Years?" She paused, letting the weight of it settle in the room. "Do you want to use it?" I looked at the stacks of paper. I looked at the gambling debts. I looked at the shopping sprees while I sat in the dark to save electricity. I thought about the police officer on my porch serving me with a lawsuit. I thought about being banned from my grandson's school. They tried to destroy me. They tried to take my home. They tried to declare me insane. I looked at Miss Kincaid. I thought I would feel sad. I thought I would feel hesitation. But all I felt was the cold, hard satisfaction of a circuit finally closing. "Use it," I said. Miss Kincaid closed the folder. "Okay, Jerry, we are going to trial. We are going to let them get up on that stand. We are going to let them tell their lies. We are going to let them cry and moan about how you broke their hearts." And then she patted the folder. "Then we are going to show them this." The war room felt different now. The air was charged. We weren't just reviewing documents anymore. We were loading the weapon. I stood up. "I am ready," I said. Miss Kincaid stood up too. "Get some sleep, Jerry. The court date is in 2 weeks, and when we walk in there, you are not going to be the defendant anymore. You are going to be the executioner." I walked out of the office into the cool night air. The city lights were blurring in the distance. I got into my truck and drove home. I put the date on my calendar. 2 weeks. 2 weeks until I looked my son in the eye and showed him exactly what happens when you try to steal a man's life. He wanted the house. He wanted the money. He was going to get a cell. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and old wood and the stale sweat of 1,000 desperate people who had sat in these benches before me. It was 9 in the morning on a Tuesday, and the air conditioning was humming a low, monotonous drone that vibrated in my teeth. I sat at the defense table next to Miss Concade. I kept my hands folded on the table. My knuckles were white. I was wearing my only suit, a charcoal gray number I had bought for my wife's funeral 10 years ago. It felt tight across the shoulders. Across the aisle sat my son and his wife. They looked like they had been cast for a movie about wholesome American families. Brandon was wearing a navy blue suit and a tie that was not too flashy. His hair was combed neatly to the side. Vanessa was wearing a modest cream-colored dress with a high neckline and sensible heels. She wore no jewelry except for her wedding band. They looked humble. They looked wronged. They looked nothing like the people who had screamed at me over the phone or furnished a mansion with stolen credit cards. They had been coached. Sender, their billboard lawyer, was sitting next to them looking smug. He leaned over and whispered something to Vanessa, and she nodded, wiping a non-existent tear from her cheek with a tissue she had been clutching since they walked in. The judge entered. Judge Walters. He was an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He did not smile. He sat down, arranged his robes, and looked at us over the top of his spectacles. Docket number 4729. Fitzpatrick versus Fitzpatrick, he read. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was starting. The machine was turning on, and once it started, it would not stop until it had chewed one of us up. Snyder stood up for his opening statement. He walked to the jury box. He did not use a podium. He wanted to be close to them. He wanted to bond with them. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice dripping with practiced sincerity. This is a case about a broken promise. It is a case about a father who looked his son in the eye and promised him a future only to snatch it away out of spite. It is a case about the devastation that follows when family turns on family. He pointed a finger at me. That man, Gerald Fitzpatrick, promised his son and his daughter-in-law that he would help them buy a home. He promised them $120,000 as a gift to secure their future. They relied on that promise. They built their lives around it. And when he pulled the rug out from under them, he did not just hurt their bank account, he broke their hearts. He caused them such severe emotional distress that Vanessa Fitzpatrick has been under the care of a therapist for months. I sat there and took it. I did not flinch. I did not shake my head. Miss Kate had told me to be a statue. If you react, she had warned me, you look guilty. If you get angry, you look volatile. Just sit there, Jerry. Let them tell their lies. We will have our turn. So I sat there. I felt the eyes of the jury on me. 12 strangers who were looking at an old man in a tight suit and seeing a villain. I saw a woman in the front row frown at me. I saw a man in a plaid shirt cross his arms and glare. They hated me already. Snyder was good at his job. He called Vanessa to the stand first. She walked up the aisle with her head down, acting like she was terrified to even look at me. She took the oath, her voice trembling just enough to sound fragile. She sat down and Sender began his questioning. Vanessa, can you tell the jury about your relationship with the defendant prior to these events? She took a deep breath. We were close. She lied. I thought of him as a father. I cooked for him. We invited him over all the time. We wanted him to be part of our lives, especially for our son Jacob. I stared at the table. She had never cooked for me in her life. The only thing she had ever served me was takeout on paper plates. And tell us about the house Snyder prompted. How did that come about? She sniffled. Brandon and I were looking for a place to raise Jacob, a safe place. Jerry knew we were struggling a bit after Brandon's job transition. He told us he wanted to help. He said he had saved all this money, and he could not take it with him. He said he wanted to see us happy. Did he make a specific promise? Snyder asked. Yes, Vanessa said, looking up, her eyes wide and wet. He said he would pay the down payment on $120,000. He said it was a gift. He said, go find the house of your dreams, kids. I have got your back. And based on that promise, what did you do? We found the house. We fell in love with it. We put down our savings as earnest money. We signed the contract. We trusted him. She started to cry, real tears. Or at least Hollywood tears. And what happened on the day of the housewarming party? Snyder asked, his voice soft and gentle. She shuddered. It was horrible. He came over and he was different. He was angry. He started shouting that we were greedy. He poured wine on our carpet. He told us we would never see a dime. He said he enjoyed watching us suffer. A gasp went through the jury box. And how has this affected you, Vanessa? I cannot sleep. She sobbed. I have panic attacks. I am terrified we are going to lose everything. We trusted him, and he destroyed us. Snyder let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. He handed her another tissue. Thank you, Vanessa, your witness. Miss Consincade stood up. She did not walk to the jury. She stayed behind the table. Mrs. Fitzpatrick, she said, her voice cool and professional. You claim my client promised this money as a gift. Is that correct? Yes, Vanessa said, dabbing her eyes. A gift, not a loan, not an investment. A gift with no strings attached. Yes, a gift. And this promise was verbal. There is no written contract signed by Mr. Fitzpatrick stating he would give you this money. No, Vanessa said, her voice hardening slightly. But a verbal contract is binding. He promised. Miss Consincade looked down at her notes. You stated that you relied on this promise to qualify for the loan. Is that correct? Yes. We needed the down payment to get the mortgage approved. Thank you. No further questions. Vanessa looked confused. She had expected a fight. She had expected Ms. Consincade to attack her character, to bring up the shopping addiction or the credit cards, but Ms. Consincade had barely touched her. It was a strategic retreat. She was saving the ammunition for the main target. Vanessa stepped down and walked back to her seat, clutching Brandon's hand for support. Next, Snyder called Brandon. My son walked to the stand. He looked better than he had in months. He had lost some weight, probably from the stress. He looked like the victim. He took the oath. He swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help him God. I watched him do it. I watched my son place his hand on the Bible and lie to God and the state of Illinois without blinking. Cinder walked him through the same story. The barbecue, the promise, the betrayal. Brandon, tell the jury exactly what your father said to you, Snyder said. Brandon looked at the jury. He had the same charming smile he used when he was trying to sell me on a new business idea. He put his hand on my shoulder, Brandon said. He looked me in the eye and he said, Son, I am proud of you. I want you to have this house. I am going to give you the 20% down. Consider it your inheritance early. I want to see you enjoy it. And did you believe him? Of course I did, Brandon said, sounding hurt. He is my dad. Why would he lie to me? Why indeed? Snyder paced back and forth. Now, Brandon, the defense might claim that this money was never promised, or that if it was a loan. What do you say to that? It was never a loan, Brandon said firmly. He was very clear. It was a gift. He knew we could not afford to pay back a loan of that size on top of a mortgage. He said it was a gift. And did you have the money otherwise, Sender asked? Could you have bought this house without his help? No, Brandon said, lowering his head. We did not have that kind of cash. We were counting on him. Without that $120,000, we could not close. The bank would never have approved us. So you are testifying under oath that the only way you could secure this home was through your father's promised gift. Yes, Brandon said, absolutely. That gift was the cornerstone of the whole deal. Snyder turned to the jury. You heard him, folks. He relied on his father's word, and his father broke it. Pass the witness, Snyder said, sitting down with a satisfied smirk. The courtroom was silent. I could feel the weight of the judgment against me. The jury looked at me with disgust. A father who lies to his son. A man who promises the world and then pulls it away just to watch them fall. I was the villain in their story. Miss Consincade stood up. She picked up a single folder from the table. It was the loan origination file. She walked to the podium. She placed the folder down. She took off her glasses. Mr. Fitzpatrick, she began. You just testified that you did not have the $120,000 for the down payment. Is that correct? Yes, Brandon said, eyeing the folder. And you testified that you needed my client's money to qualify for the loan. Yes. And you testified that this money was explicitly promised as a gift, not a loan, not a... Yes, Brandon said, looking annoyed. I already said that. Ms. Consincade nodded. She opened the folder. You applied for this mortgage with First City Bank. Is that correct? Yes. And as part of that application, you were required to submit proof of funds. You had to show the bank where the down payment was coming from. Brandon shifted in his seat. He licked his lips. Yes, he said slowly. Miss Consincade pulled a document out of the folder. She held it up. Your Honor, I would like to enter Defense Exhibit A into evidence. She walked to the witness stand and handed the paper to Brandon. Do you recognize this document, Mr. Fitzpatrick? Brandon looked at it. His face went pale. The color drained out of him so fast I thought he might faint. His hands started to shake. He stammered. Miss Consincade's voice rang out clear and sharp, cutting through the silence like a whip. For the record, Mr. Fitzpatrick, please read the title of the document you are holding. Brandon swallowed hard. He looked at Snyder, who was frowning, confused. It is a gift letter, he whispered. Louder, please, Miss Consincade said. It is a gift letter, Brandon said, his voice cracking. And what does a gift letter do, Mr. Fitzpatrick? It certifies that funds have been gifted. Miss Consincade took a step closer. This document dated July 10th states that Gerald Fitzpatrick has already gifted you $120,000. It states that the funds are currently in your possession, and at the bottom there is a signature. Whose signature is? That Brandon stared at the paper. He stared at the forgery he had committed. It says Gerald Fitzpatrick, he mumbled. Miss Consincade turned to the jury. So, Mr. Fitzpatrick, we have a problem. You just told this jury under oath that my client promised you the money but never gave it to you. That is why you are suing him. But this document which you submitted to a federally insured bank claims he already gave it to you. She leaned in. So, which is it, Brandon? Did he give you the money and you are lying to this court to get paid twice? Or did he never give you the money and you lied to the bank to get the loan? The trap snapped shut. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. You could hear the air conditioning humming. You could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Brandon looked at the judge. He looked at his lawyer. He looked at me. He realized in that moment that he was not fighting for a house anymore. He was fighting for his freedom, and he had just lost. Miss Consincade paced slowly in front of the jury box, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with a rhythmic predatory sound that seemed to echo in the cavernous room. She did not look at Brandon immediately. She looked at the 12 men and women who held my fate in their hands. She let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, until a juror in the back row shifted in his seat and cleared his throat. Only then did she turn her gaze to my son. Fitzpatrick? She began, her voice deceptively soft, almost conversational. I want to make sure the jury understands the timeline and the nature of this alleged agreement perfectly. We do not want there to be any ambiguity. Brandon straightened his tie. He looked confident. He thought the hard part was over. He thought Snyder had already won the day with the sob story about the broken promise. He had no idea that Miss Consincade was not asking questions to get answers. She was asking questions to close the exits. You testified that you approached your father at the 4th of July barbecue. Is that correct? She asked. Yes. Brandon replied, his voice projecting to the back of the room, just like his lawyer had coached him. It was on the patio. And at that time, did you ask your father for a loan? Miss Consincade asked. Brandon frowned slightly. No, I did not ask for a loan. Did you discuss interest rates? Did you discuss a repayment schedule? Did you talk about what would happen if you defaulted? No? Brandon said, shaking his head. We did not talk about any of that, because it was not a business transaction. It was a family matter. So to be absolutely clear, Miss Consincade said, stepping closer to the witness stand, you had no intention of paying this money back. Not 1 cent of the $120,000? No, Brandon said firmly. It was a gift. He offered it as a gift to help his family. Why would I pay back a gift? Miss Consincade nodded as if this was the most reasonable thing in the world. She walked back to the defense table and picked up a piece of paper. It was not the gift letter yet. It was a copy of the lawsuit complaint. She held it up. In this lawsuit filed by you and your wife, you are suing my client for breach of contract, but you just stated there was no loan agreement. So the contract you are referring to is solely a verbal promise to gift you a substantial sum of money. Is that right? Yes. Brandon said a verbal contract is still a contract. He gave his word. And you are asking this court to force your father to hand over his retirement savings based on this verbal promise of a gift. Brandon looked at the jury, trying to garner sympathy. He promised, he said, his voice taking on a whining edge. We made plans, we signed papers. We put our livelihood on the line because he told us the money was ours. Miss Consincade stopped pacing. She stood perfectly still. You put your livelihood on the line, she repeated. That is an interesting phrase, Mr. Fitzpatrick. Let us talk about that. You testified earlier that you could not afford this house without my client's money. That is correct. Brandon said we needed the down payment to close. So without the $120,000, the deal falls through. Yes. And knowing that you did not have the money in your bank account, knowing that you only had a verbal promise from your father, you went ahead and signed a purchase agreement for an $800 or $1,000 home. We trusted him, Brandon said defensively. We trusted he would come through. Miss Consincade leaned against the railing of the witness stand. Mr. Fitzpatrick, when you applied for the mortgage, did the bank ask you where the down payment was coming from? Brandon hesitated. His eyes flicked to Cinder, his lawyer. Snyder gave a barely perceptible nod. Yes, Brandon said slowly. They asked for proof of funds. And what did you tell them? I told them my father was gifting me the money. You told them he was gifting it, or that he had gifted it? Brandon blinked. I do not recall the exact wording. I told them the money was coming from him. Miss Consincade turned to face the jury again. This is a crucial distinction, Mr. Fitzpatrick. A bank will not lend you $600,000 on a wish and a prayer. They need certainty. They need to know the money exists and that it is available. She walked back to the table and picked up the blue folder again, the one containing the loan origination file. We're going to come back to what you told the bank in a moment, she said. But first I want to lock down one final detail. You are stating under oath right now in front of this judge and this jury that as of July 20th, the day of the closing, you did not have the money. My client had not transferred it to you. He had refused. Yes, Brandon said angrily. That is why we are here. He pulled out at the last second. He left us high and dry, so the money was never in your possession. No, never. And my client never signed a check. He never wired funds. No. Thank you, Miss Consincade said. She turned to look at me. Her eyes were cold, but I saw a flicker of satisfaction. She had him. She had just made him swear under oath that the money was never transferred. Why was that important? Because the document she was holding in her hand, the document she was about to show him, claimed the exact opposite. Brandon sat there looking smug. He thought he had won the point. He thought he had proven that I was a cruel father who broke a promise. He did not realize that by insisting he never got the money, he was proving that the document he gave the bank was a lie. If he had said, "Oh yes, he gave me the money but then took it back," he might have had a sliver of a defense against the fraud charge. But he had just confirmed that the transaction never happened, which meant the paper in Ms. Consincade's hand was a smoking gun of federal bank fraud. Ms. Consincade walked back to the podium. She placed her hands on either side of it and looked up at Brandon. "Mr. Fitzpatrick, do you know what mortgage fraud is?" Snyder jumped up. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance." "Is counsel threatening the witness?" Judge Walters looked over his glasses. "Overruled," the judge said. "I want to see where this is going." "Answer the question, Mr. Fitzpatrick." Brandon shifted in his seat. He looked nervous for the first time. "I guess it is lying to a bank to get a loan," he mumbled. "Exactly," Miss Consincade said. "It is a federal crime. It carries a sentence of up to 30 years in prison and a fine of up to $1 million. She picked up the gift letter. "Now, Mr. Fitzpatrick, you testified that you told the bank the money was a gift, and you testified that you never received that gift." "Yes." Brandon said, his voice barely a whisper. "Then can you explain to this court and to this jury why you submitted a document to First City Bank dated July 10th, stating that the gift had already been transferred and was currently in your account?" She walked up to him and slapped the paper down on the witness stand. The sound cracked like a gunshot in the silent room. "Read the first paragraph, Mr. Fitzpatrick. Read it aloud." Brandon looked down at the paper. His face went gray. He recognized it. He remembered forging it. He remembered tracing my signature late at night at his kitchen table, thinking he was so smart, thinking no one would ever check. He stammered. "Read it," Miss Consincade commanded. Brandon's voice shook. "I, Gerald Fitzpatrick, hereby certify that I have given a gift of $120,000 to Brandon Fitzpatrick. This is a bona fide gift, and there is no obligation to repay." He stopped reading. "Keep going," Miss Consincade said. "The next sentence, the funds have been transferred and are currently available in the borrower's account." Miss Consincade stepped back. "So, Mr. Fitzpatrick, you told the bank the funds were in your account. You told this jury the funds were never in your account. One of those statements is a lie. Which one is it?" Brandon looked at Snyder. Snyder's face had gone white. He was realizing that his client had not just lost the case, but had committed a felony and dragged him into it. Snyder started to stand up, probably to object, probably to ask for a recess, but he sank back down. He knew it was too late. It was just paperwork," Brandon said, tears welling up in his eyes. "The broker said we needed it to close." "I didn't mean you didn't mean to commit fraud," Miss Consincade asked, "or you didn't mean to get caught." "I did not have a choice," Brandon shouted. "We needed the house." "And that is the signature at the bottom," Miss Consincade said, pointing to my name. Did Gerald Fitzpatrick sign that? Brandon looked at me. For a second, I saw the boy I used to know. The boy who would break a window playing baseball and then lie about it until I found the ball in the bushes. He looked terrified. He looked small. But I did not feel pity. I felt the weight of the credit card debt he had racked up in my name. I felt the sting of the restraining order. I felt the shame of being banned from my grandson's school. "No," Brandon whispered. "He didn't sign it." "Then who did?" A gasp ripped through the courtroom. The jury was staring at him with open mouths. The judge was leaning forward, his eyes narrowed into slits. "You forged your father's signature on a federal banking document to secure a $600,000 loan Miss Kincaid asked. I had to, Brandon sobbed. He promised me the money. I was just helping him do what he said he would do. Miss Kincaid turned to the judge. Your Honor, she said, her voice ringing with authority. The defense moves for an immediate dismissal of all civil claims. The plaintiff has just admitted to perjury and bank fraud in open court. His hands are unclean. He cannot seek equity when he has committed a felony to create the very situation he is suing over. She looked back at Brandon one last time. You wanted your father to pay for your house, Mr. Fitzpatrick. Instead, he is going to pay for your lawyer. And I suspect the taxpayers are going to pay for your housing for the next 5 to 10 years. She sat down. She sat. The silence that followed was heavy and final. It was the sound of a life collapsing. Brandon put his head in his hands and wept. Vanessa was frozen in her seat, staring at the wall as if she could not believe her script had gone so wrong. But I looked at the judge. He was not looking at Brandon. He was looking at the bailiff, and I knew that the civil trial was over. The criminal trial was about to begin. Ms. Kincaid held the document up to the light as if inspecting a counterfeit bill. It was a single sheet of paper, but it carried the weight of a tombstone. She walked slowly toward the jury box, holding the paper so they could see the bank logo at the top. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice ringing off the back walls. This is what is known in the mortgage industry as a gift letter. It is a mandatory document required by the lender when a borrower claims their down payment is coming from a relative. She turned back to Brandon. He was sweating now, not a glow, but a heavy, greasy sweat that made his forehead shine under the fluorescent lights. Mr. Fitzpatrick, she said, placing the paper directly in front of him. I want you to look at the date July 10th. That is 10 days before the closing of the house. 10 days before you claim my client broke his promise. Brandon looked down. He did not want to touch it. It was toxic. Miss Kincaid leaned in. Her voice dropped to a whisper that was louder than a scream. Here is the problem, Brandon. Here is the trap you built for yourself. This letter certifies two things. First, it certifies that the $120,000 is a gift and not a loan. Second, and this is the part you need to pay attention to, it certifies that the funds have already been transferred. She pointed to the line. Donor certifies that funds have been transferred to borrower's account ending in 4599. She straightened up and walked back to the center of the room. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, here is the deadly logic of the plaintiff's case. She held up one finger. Scenario A. This letter is telling the truth. If this letter is truthful, then Gerald Fitzpatrick transferred the money on July 10th. If that is the case, then Brandon has the money. And if he has the money, then this lawsuit for breach of contract is frivolous because the contract was fulfilled. He cannot sue for money he already has. She held up a second finger. Scenario B. This letter is a lie. If the money was never transferred as Brandon testified 10 minutes ago, then this document is a fabrication submitted to a federally insured financial institution for the purpose of securing a mortgage. She turned back to Brandon. So which is it, Mr. Fitzpatrick? Did you lie to this court when you said you never got the money? Or did you lie to the bank when you said you did the air in the courtroom seem to vanish? It was a perfect logical vice. There was no wiggle room, no space for interpretation. Either he was a perjurer or he was a fraudster. There was no third door. Brandon looked at Snyder. His lawyer was staring at the table, refusing to make eye contact. Snyder knew. He knew that his client had just nuked his own case and probably his license to practice law if he did not distance himself fast enough. Brandon stammered the bank. The broker said it was just paperwork. He said we just needed to show it to get the clear to close. He said we could sort out the transfer later. Ms. Kincaid pounced. So you admit that the statement in this letter is false? You admit that you told the bank you had the money when you did not. Brandon looked like a trapped animal. Yes, he whispered, but Dad promised. He said he would give it to me. I just sped up the process. You sped up the process, Miss Consincade repeated dryly. That is a very interesting way to pronounce bank fraud. She picked up the document again. Now let us look at the signature. She projected an image of the signature onto the screen for the jury. It read, Gerald Fitzpatrick. It was a shaky signature. It looked like mine, but I knew the truth. Mr. Fitzpatrick, she said you just testified that your father refused to sign the mortgage papers. You said he poured wine on your rug and walked out. Yes, Brandon said. So if he refused to sign the mortgage papers, why would he sign a gift letter 10 days earlier? Brandon opened his mouth and closed it. He had lost the thread of his own lies. Miss Consincade did not wait for an answer. We have travel records showing my client was in Orlando, Florida on July 10th. He was physically incapable of signing this document in Chicago. She slammed her hand down on the railing. Who signed this document? Brandon. The silence stretched. It was painful. I watched my son realizing that the game was over. The mansion, the cars, the lifestyle, it was all dissolving. I signed it, he whispered. Miss Consincade did not let up. You forged your father's signature. Yes. You impersonated him to a bank. Yes. And you did this to secure a loan for $600,000 that you could not afford otherwise. Yes. Miss Consincade turned to the jury. Her face was grim. He wanted you to believe his father broke a promise. But the truth is he broke the law. He stole his father's identity. He forged his father's name. And he tried to use this court to enforce a theft. She looked at the judge. Your Honor, the defense moves to dismiss all charges, and we ask that this exhibit be sealed and transferred immediately to the United States Attorney's Office. I looked at Brandon. He was crying now, not the fake tears for the jury. These were real tears of terror. He realized that the house he wanted me to pay for was going to be a prison cell, and the check I was writing him today was not for a down payment. It was for a lesson he would never forget. Judge Walters cleared his throat. It was not a polite sound. It was the sound of a heavy wooden door slamming shut on a life. He took off his wire-rimmed glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose slowly, as if he were trying to massage away the headache my son had just given him. He picked up the gift letter, holding it by the corner as if it were contaminated waste. He looked at Brandon, who was trembling in the witness chair. Then he looked at Snyder, who was currently trying to make himself invisible behind a stack of legal pads. Finally, he looked at me. Mr. Fitzpatrick, the judge said, his voice booming, without the aid of a microphone. Please stand up. I stood, my legs felt heavy, but my spine was straight. I buttoned my charcoal jacket. Judge Walters held up the document. Sir, I am going to ask you one question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer, because the next 5 minutes are going to determine the rest of your son's life. Did you sign this letter? I looked at the judge. I looked at the signature on the page, a shaky blue scroll that tried so hard to be mine, but lacked the weight of 40 years of hard work. No, Your Honor, I said clearly, I did not. The judge nodded slowly. Can you prove it? Ms. Consincade stepped forward. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply handed a thin sheath of papers to the bailiff, who walked them up to the bench. Your Honor, she said, these are Delta Airlines flight manifests and hotel receipts from the Rosen Plaza in Orlando. They confirmed that on July 10th, the date this document was allegedly signed in Chicago, my client was physically located in the state of Florida, attending the National Electrical Contractors Association convention. He checked in on the 9th and checked out on the 12th. Judge Walters flipped through the receipts. He looked at the dates, he looked at the timestamps, he looked back at Brandon. Brandon was not looking at anyone. He was staring at his lap, his chest heaving, his face slick with sweat. He looked like a child who had been caught playing with matches while the house burned down around him. The judge put the papers down. He put his glasses back on. "Mr. Snyder," the judge said, his voice ice cold. "Do you have any rebuttal to this evidence?" Snyder stood up. He looked sick. "No, Your Honor, I was not aware of the existence of this document until this moment, if I had known." "Sit down, Mr. Sunder," the judge barked. He turned his gaze to Brandon and Vanessa. Vanessa was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. "Plaintiffs, you came into my courtroom seeking equity," the judge began. "You asked this court to enforce a verbal contract. You claimed that you were victims of a broken promise. You claimed that you were destitute because of the defendant's malice." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But equity requires clean hands, and your hands are filthy. You have just admitted under oath that you forged a signature to defraud a federally insured bank. You admitted that you lied on a loan application. And then you came into this courtroom and lied to this jury, claiming you never received the funds that you told the bank you already had." Brandon tried to speak. "Your Honor, please. We just wanted a home." "Be quiet," the judge snapped. "You did not want a home. You wanted a theft. You attempted to use the judicial system as a weapon to extort money from your father. That is not just a frivolous lawsuit, Mr. Fitzpatrick. That is a crime." Judge Walters banged his gavel. The sound was like a gunshot. "This civil case is dismissed with prejudice. The plaintiffs will pay all legal fees incurred by the defendant." He was not done. He turned to the bailiff who was standing by the door, his hand resting on his belt. "Bailiff, take Mr. Brandon Fitzpatrick and Mrs. Vanessa Fitzpatrick into custody immediately." Vanessa screamed. It was a high, piercing sound of disbelief. "No, you cannot arrest us. We are the victims here. He promised us the money." "Sit down, ma'am," the bailiff shouted, moving quickly across the room. Judge Walters continued, his voice cutting through her hysteria. "I am holding you both in direct contempt of court for perjury. Furthermore, I am referring this entire file, including the forged gift letter and the fraudulent loan application, to the United States Attorney's Office for prosecution under the federal bank fraud statutes." Two deputies moved in from the back of the courtroom. They were not smiling. They pulled Brandon out of the witness chair. He went limp, his legs giving out beneath him. He looked at me, his eyes wide with terror. "Dad," he wailed. "Dad, help me. Tell them. Tell them you signed it. Please, Dad, do not let them take me." I stood there watching the deputies pull his arms behind his back. I heard the metallic click of the handcuffs. It was a sound I would hear in my nightmares for the rest of my life. But I did not look away. I owed him that much. I owed him the truth. "I cannot help you, son." I said, my voice steady, though my heart was breaking. "You signed your own name to this." Vanessa was fighting. She was trying to pull away from the female deputy who had grabbed her arm. "It was Brandon," she shrieked, pointing at her husband with a handcuffed hand. "He did it. He forged the signature. I told him not to. I just wanted the house. He is the one who lied." Brandon looked at his wife, the woman he had stolen for the woman he had destroyed his relationship with his father for. He saw her throwing him to the wolves without a second thought. His head dropped to his chest, and he began to sob. The deputies marched them out the side door. The heavy oak door swung shut behind them, cutting off Vanessa's screams. The courtroom was silent again. The jury was stunned. Snyder was packing his briefcase with frantic, jerky movements, trying to flee the scene of the disaster. Judge Walters looked at me, his expression softened just a fraction. "Mr. Fitzpatrick," he said, "I am sorry you had to go through this. You are free to go. Thank you." "Your Honor," I said. I picked up my hat. I turned to Ms. Consincade. She was closing her file, her face grim. "Is it over?" I asked. "The lawsuit is over, Jerry," she said. "But for them, the nightmare is just starting." Federal sentencing guidelines for mortgage fraud are mandatory. "They're not going home tonight." I nodded. I felt a strange emptiness in my chest. It was not victory. It was just the end of the pain. I walked out of the courtroom. I walked down the long marble hallway. I pushed open the heavy doors and stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun. I walked to my truck. I got in and sat there for a long time. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was a number from the county jail. I looked at it. I watched it ring. And then I rolled down the window and threw the phone onto the pavement. It shattered. I started the engine. I put the truck in gear. I had a house to sell. I had a trust fund to set up for a grandson I hope to see again in 20 years. And I had a road trip to take. I drove away, leaving the courthouse behind me, leaving my son behind me, leaving the wreckage of my family in the rear-view mirror. I was free. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut echoed in my mind long after the courtroom had emptied. It was a sound that marked the end of my family line as I knew it. But the destruction did not stop at the courthouse steps. It rolled outward like a tsunami, hitting everything in its path. The first casualty was the innocence of my grandson Jacob. He was sitting in the principal's office at his private school, waiting for a mother and father who were never going to show up. I could not go get him. The restraining order was technically still in place until the paperwork cleared. And frankly, I did not think I had the strength to look him in the eye. Instead, I called my sister Margaret. She lives 2 towns over. She is a retired nurse with a spine of steel and a heart that still had room for a broken boy. She picked him up with a social worker. She told me later that he did not cry. He just asked if he could bring his video games. He did not ask for his parents. That silence spoke louder than any scream about the kind of home Brandon and Vanessa had built. The second casualty was the mansion. The $600,000 $1,000 monument to their greed did not last 24 hours. Because the mortgage was obtained through fraud, the bank did not foreclose in the traditional slow way. They seized the asset. I drove by the house one last time a day later. I wanted to see it. There were no moving trucks. There was just a sheriff's deputy putting a padlock on the front door. A neon orange sticker was plastered on the glass. Property of the U.S. government seized evidence. Inside that house were the Italian leather sofas, the 80-inch televisions, the designer clothes. All of it locked away, all of it rotting. It was a tomb of consumerism. I heard from Ms. Concade that Vanessa did not go quietly in the holding cell. She had turned into a feral animal. She was not screaming about her son. She was not screaming about her freedom. She was screaming about Brandon. She told anyone who would listen that she had been tricked. She claimed she was a victim of financial abuse. She claimed Brandon had forced her to spend the money, had forced her to live in that house. She was rewriting history in real time, desperate to paint herself as the naive wife dragged down by a criminal husband. She filed for divorce from her jail cell. It took her less than 48 hours to sever the bond she had sworn before God would last forever. Brandon, on the other hand, went silent. My lawyer told me he was on suicide watch. He had lost his wife, his son, his freedom, and his father in a single afternoon. He was sitting in a 6AI8 cell, wearing a jumpsuit that cost less than the socks he used to wear. Realizing that he had traded his life for a lie, I stood on the sidewalk looking at the seized mansion. The grass was already starting to look a little long. The illusion of perfection was fading. I did not feel triumphant. I felt heavy. I felt the weight of a legacy that had ended in a federal indictment. But I also felt a strange clarity. The tumor had been cut out. The surgery was brutal, and the recovery would be long, but the sickness was gone. I got back in my truck. I had one more thing to do before I could truly disappear. I had to secure the future for the only Fitzpatrick who still had a chance. Jacob. I drove to Margaret's house. I did not go in. I just left an envelope in her mailbox. It contained the details of a trust fund. And then I drove away. I put the for all sign in the yard myself. It took 3 days to sell the ranch on Oak Street. A young couple bought it. They were expecting their first child, and they looked at the linoleum floors I had laid with the same wonder I had felt 40 years ago. I left them the lawnmower. I left them the tools in the shed. I left them the ghosts. I took only my clothes, my photos, and the check. I did not keep the money. Well, not most of it. I took the proceeds from the sale along with a significant chunk of my investment portfolio. And I went back to Ms. Connincade's office one last time. We were not building a lawsuit anymore. We were building a fortress. We established the Jacob Fitzpatrick Irrevocable Trust. It was a thing of beauty. Ms. Consincade wrote the bylaws with the precision of a diamond cutter. The principal amount was over $500,000. It would sit there growing and compounding untouchable by anyone until Jacob turned 25. But the most important clause was the one Miss Consincade called the poison pill. It stated clearly that if Brandon or Vanessa ever attempted to access the funds, ever attempted to borrow against the trust, or ever petitioned the court to become trustees, the entire balance would immediately liquidate and be donated to the local animal shelter. It was the ultimate fail-off. They could not steal from their son without destroying his inheritance. I signed the papers with a steady hand. I was not abandoning my grandson. I was protecting him from the only predators he needed to worry about his parents. With the rest of my savings, I bought a 24 FT Winnebago. It was brand new. It smelled of fresh carpet and freedom. I'd spent my whole life tethered to a zip code, tethered to a job, tethered to a family that saw me as a utility. Now the only thing tethering me was the fuel gauge. I drove out of Chicago on a Tuesday morning. The sky was that deep, endless blue you only see in the Midwest before winter sets in. I hit the interstate and pointed the nose of the RV west. I did not have a plan. I did not have a destination. I just had the road. I was crossing the state line into Iowa when my cell phone rang. It was sitting in the cup holder, vibrating against the hard plastic. I looked at the screen. The caller ID was distinct. Cook County Department of Corrections. Collect call. It was Brandon. It had been a week since the arrest. He was likely calling to beg for bail money. Or maybe he wanted to scream at me again. Maybe he wanted to ask why I had sold his childhood home. Or maybe he just wanted to hear his father's voice one last time to remind him that he still existed. I stared at the phone. I thought about answering. I thought about telling him that I loved him, but that love wasn't enough to save him from himself. I thought about telling him that the house was gone and the money was locked away, and that he was on his own for the first time in his life. But then I realized I had already said everything that needed to be said. My testimony was my goodbye. The sentence was his closure. I picked up the phone. It was warm in my hand. I pressed the button to roll down the driver's side window. The wind roared into the cabin, loud and chaotic, and smelling of cornfields and asphalt. I did not answer the call. I tossed the phone out the window. I watched in the side mirror as it tumbled along the highway, bouncing once, twice, before shattering into 1,000 pieces of plastic and glass under the wheels of a semi-truck behind me. The ringing stopped. The silence returned. I took a deep breath. I turned up the radio. I gripped the wheel with hands that had worked hard for 50 years and were finally at rest. I drove into the horizon. I was 73 years old. I was alone, and for the first time in my life, I was free. We spend our lives trying to build a safety net for our children, hoping they never fall. But I learned the hard way that sometimes that net becomes a hammock for their entitlement. True love isn't about funding a lifestyle they haven't earned. It is about having the courage to let them face the storm alone. By cutting the cord, I didn't just save my retirement. I reclaimed my dignity. You cannot buy respect. and you certainly cannot bribe your way into a happy family. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is say no and let the chips fall where they may. If you think I did the right thing by letting my son face the consequences of his actions, hit that like button and tell me your thoughts in the comments below.